Let's give some attention to the lower legs. So for this, you'll need a chair, but you could always use something like the end of your bed or a coffee table, and then a firm blanket. Now, my alternative to the blanket is something I use in the studio, which is a foam roller that's been cut in half. So it ends up just being this dome shape. So if you have one of these, it's the perfect tool for what we're doing. But what most of us will end up doing, I'm sure, is to take a blanket and to give it a couple of good folds. So here I have one of these typical yoga studio blankets. And what I'm going to do is give it a fold into fourths, which I do by putting one end of it on the ground. And that way I end up with a firmly folded blanket. It'll compress quite a bit when I'm stepping on it, but it acts as a really good support for what we're doing. So I'm going to lay that to the ground ahead of me and give you a sense of what we'll be doing. We're going to move the ankle to a position called dorsiflexion, which is when the top of the foot comes towards the front of the shin. You'll feel this as a calf stretch more than likely. And when you have this blanket as the prop that we're using, it's pretty adaptable. So though I folded it into quarters, once we get going with it, I might feel like that's too steep and I'll unfold it. So when we come into this, we're going to have the right foot with the ball of the foot on the blanket and the heel on the ground. So I just wanted to give you the first shot of this so that you can see from the profile. And if you feel like this is, oh no, I can't, then unfold it by some amount and see what you can do. And also from this profile view, I want you to notice if in order to stand like this, you have to put your torso forward. Like, is that such a significant joint position that it begins to pull on the upper body? I'll show you from the front for the most of this, because I think you'll be able to see a little bit better. So what we're gonna do is start on that right side, park that right foot uphill, determine if that's tolerable based on the sensation that it elicits, and then also determine if that's sustainable based on your position of your body. So what I've seen happen here is what I just mentioned, you kind of hunch forward. The other one is that you kind of go sideways to work around it. Or we begin to swing the pelvis into a twist. So if you find that once you have your foot uphill, that the rest of your body has to flex, shift, bend, turn, then it's not for you. Lower it down a little bit and come up with something more sustainable. Because essentially thereafter, you're going to be in Tadasana. We'll be doing this with our feet at our pelvic width distance, so you can identify those frontal hip points, get a sense that if you were to draw lines down the fronts of your legs, you'd pretty much bisect them and end up with the center fronts of your ankles underneath your pelvis. All right, so as we're here, we've been here for a moment already. What you'll likely be feeling is a sensation of stretch from the Achilles all the way up to the back of the knee. We're going to stay with this for a few moments and just monitor for yourself a couple times. Did I end up shifting or turning my pelvis? Do I have my lower body all set, but then my upper body is tipping forward? And what can you put into this as your Tadasana? And we'll give it those last couple of breaths with that consideration. If you have come to this and from the start, you feel totally knocked off balance, the regression for this, meaning you're going to make it one step more accessible to you, is to take this left foot and to step it back by any amount. And so you can see here now, my right foot is ahead of me. I still have that dorsiflexion, the foot tipping up position, but I no longer am directly on top of that with my pelvis. So again, if the sensation was so strong that you were getting knocked off balance, then this is your position. Otherwise, we've been with the feet in line with each other for a few moments. Your next progression, meaning if you want to take it a little bit down the road, is to take this left foot and to step forward by any amount, a teeny tiny amount or a greater amount where you might mimic your actual stride length when you're walking. Now, there's a couple of likely outcomes to this that I've seen many times before. And one of them is a kick way off to the side with that right hip. So if you took your left foot forward and then suddenly you're in this zigzag position, I want you to make sure you've centered your pelvis underneath your ribs, underneath your shoulders. So you're still vertical from top to bottom. The other thing that's a really likely outcome is that you've got this foot behind you now. So if you stepped your left foot forward, it's like you're taking a little bit of a stride. It's like a snapshot of your gait. You might find that you don't actually have that much dorsiflexion to give. And so one of our workarounds is to twist the pelvis back, which basically says this tension on my calf is so significant that I have to, that it pulls my pelvis back towards it. So what I want us all to find here is that your frontal hip points are pointing, true north, straight down the road. And again, you haven't shifted your pelvis out towards the side. Okay, I'm going to do a little pivot so you see the profile again. The last progression, if you are looking to go a little bit further down the road with this, so right foot on, left foot is forward, and you could from here put any amount of knee bend into that left leg. And you can see that still takes my body forward while that heel bone is left behind. So we'll give this a couple of breaths, and the same couple of check-ins persist. One, you don't want to swing that pelvis to the side, and then two, this is very likely you don't want that right side of the pelvis turning towards the right because that right calf is so darn tight. So you're going to think here about facing forward. All right, we've been here for a few moments, so let's back off. Step on out of that. If you need just like a little shakeout or a couple of steps to walk around, here's the moment for it. But of course, we're going to do this all on our second side. So I'm going to kind of like fluff this up because I compressed it so much with my right foot. I want to give my left foot a chance to work on it with its fluffiest height. All right, so I've got my blanket folded into quarters. The other thing I would mention here is that I have, let's say, longer than average feet. So if you have a petite foot, it might not be like a dorsiflexion limitation. It might just be like the length of your foot. So if you end up going lower, I hope all my yoga students know this, that's not like a lesser bit of yoga. It's the same amount of yoga in everyone's pose. Just you might have to make an adaptation that I might not have to do. So my left heel is on the ground. My left ball of the foot is parked uphill. And if you were going to be knocked akimbo by this and you could not resolve your balance, then you want your right foot back. Otherwise, where you might just start is to have your feet in line with each other. And you're putting this inside the template of a Tadasana. So we don't want to end up leaning forward. We don't want the hip kicking out to the side. And as you stand, can you envision here that these two frontal hip points kind of determine the width between our feet for this pose? And we'll stay a few moments. This is my tighter side. So it's automatically like, there we go. There's the stretch. And as you give yourself those couple of breaths and you acclimate to the sensation that could be quite strong for you here, are you able to not even just do a Tadasana like through form, but also internally? Like, can you just look forward and have that levelness inside of your breathing, inside of the eyes? We'll move along in a moment, but I just wanted to remind you that this is not sort of an isolated incident for the lower body, but it can be integrated into the good stuff that you know already about your yoga practice. Okay, my friends. So the next point along that you could go is to take this right foot, which has been on the floor, and to do something of a step forward. Now I'm going to move that left heel so it's forward of the blanket that I'm standing on, but you could have that, quarter that, and not step that foot so far forward and still be giving yourself the next iteration. Okay, the check-ins here are that you don't have to end up in this zigzag, but maybe more, like it's a little bit more prevalent. I've seen more people have to correct this, is that your calf could just be so influential that it bears its influence all the way up to your low back and your pelvis. So if you find that your left hip is getting pulled behind you, that your pelvis is turning towards the left, maybe you want this lower, or maybe you want to step back a little bit, because we don't want that that calf's tension to be exerting an influence this far upstream where we just kind of have to put up with, oh, well, I'm going to end up turning my pelvis to the side. We want to be able to say, this is all in reference to a Tadasana, and maybe even more broadly, it's actually in reference to your gait, to your walking. And there are plenty of people who they lack this ankle mobility to have that front of the foot lift off of the floor, and so they shuffle, or they don't have such great mobility in taking that front of the foot off the floor, so they swivel. And so this is sort of a snapshot of your gait, which is really complex, but I like to take a small moment of it and be like, what happens when we make that calf lengthen upstream? Like, you know, when I first started doing this particular pose, I found myself in my very, you know, Erin style scoliosis curve. So it was like, oh, wow, that's how much that calf can like show me what my spine is doing. So last progression for this, again, I'll pivot to the side if that's more illuminating. Heel on the floor, ball the foot up. I've stepped forward. And so if I put a knee bend, you can see that it moves my whole body forward, but it actually increases the amount of that dorsiflexion on the foot behind me. And there are yoga poses in which this dorsiflexion is actually relied on quite a bit. You can think of the warrior poses. That back leg has quite a bit of dorsiflexion within it. I hope you're feeling a stretch. I sure am. All right, and though I've gone certain amounts to display this and to practice this with you, you can go in lesser or greater amounts. There's no set standard of what this should look like, nor what it would feel like, though it feels like a stretch. Did I mention that yet? All right, I'm gonna back out of this and come off the blanket and just kind of give my feet a little shake out for a moment, shift my weight around. We're gonna take those dorsiflexed ankles and combine them with a forward bend. So I'm going to suggest a chair. You know, even if you're really loose for Uttanasana, standing forward bend, it's nice every once in a while to select not to employ that flexibility. So as I have this, again, I'll kind of fluff it up. I'm going to place it ahead of my chair. And then I'm going to take a moment to step both of my feet uphill. And again, would you reduce this height? Now we have both feet up. That can kind of be a greater impact. So even if you had a single foot on this quadruple fold blanket, you might lessen the height while you put both feet up. And actually, I'm just gonna fluff that around a little bit so I don't unfold it while I'm standing on it. So usually those firmer edges, the folded edges, are a little bit easier to work with. Now I've taught this one a lot too, and even though we don't get to share space at the same time right now, I've known many people who come on to this and it's like they end up on a surfboard. And so if you find this is really impactful for your balance, that's maybe noteworthy. It's not diagnostic of anything in particular, but you might find that this much dorsiflexion is not something that comes easy. If you like walking up hills, if you're a hiker, I like walking up hills. There's a good hill in my neighborhood that I really like. This dorsiflexion is part of going uphill. You can see that's kind of what my feet are doing. Okay, we've been here for a moment. I hope you've encountered a little bit of a wobble just to kind of tell your nervous system, hey, we want to be able to stand like this too. We're going to come into a forward bend, and I want you to be fairly particular about this. So if the injunction was get your fingers to the chair, I'd get there pretty quickly, but I would do so with the roundest possible spine. So I want to keep the sense of length, and the movement almost entirely is going to come from your ability to tilt your pelvis forward. So as I come into what a lot of people will call a hip hinge, I'm not flexing my head forward, rounding my shoulders, curving my spine. I want to keep my Tadasana upper body, but then just hinge it forward from the pelvis. And if the chair or other object that you end up using just doesn't feel close enough, just swap it out for something else, use a different aspect of it, place some objects onto it, so that when you come over, you don't have to round your spine or bend into your knees. So what a lot of us know as sort of the main points of a typical hip hinge or a flat backed forward bend or Ardha Uttanasana. Now, as you have this, we're going to keep the backs of the legs straight. So if you find your knees buckling into a bend. See if you can get them a little bit longer. And think of that happening mostly from the lift of the sit bone, not so much as your ability to slam the legs out straight. And when we come into this, we're going to call this our starting point. So I have vertical legs here. So my hip is over my outer ankle. We're going to change that. So I'm going to lean back, and that's sort of relief for my lower legs. My calves are happy that I stopped stretching them as much for the moment, though my hamstrings are feeling more of it towards the sitting bones attachment. And then we're going to come forward by some amount. So there's my vertical legs. And then here's, I'm going to bring my hands out just to catch my weight more simply. Here's tipping forward. And so my ankles are back as the target to that movement. So you can come forward and back a few times here. Your range for this lean forward and lean back could be smaller or greater than mine. And even though we're not walking around and making great angle changes to the forward bend, I think you can perceive here that one of these, the leaning forward, is more reliant on your ankle to dorsiflex, and the other one, leaning back, is a little bit more reliant on your hip hinge, the ability to kick your tailbone up. And so you might find one or two more here. You can go easy peasy through this. You know, it's always on the practitioner of the pose to figure out how much sensation is tolerable. And you might have a personality trait that always feels like more is more, like the more sensation, the more benefit. I don't know that that's always true. That's not, you know, that's psychologically true for some people, but it's not necessarily true in the mechanics of your tissues. So I wonder if you can give yourself some space to do maybe a little bit less. Like what's half the amount of sensation? And then land somewhere close towards your vertical legs. You can move your hands back in underneath your shoulders. I'm gonna pop myself from palms to fingertips, so I'm just a little bit more tuned into my back strength. Hands to hips, and then inhale, we'll come up to stand here and just stay for a moment before you hop off of this blanket and get the heck out of dorsiflexion. How does your balance feel? How does simple standing feel after having done that forward bend? I feel more comfortable here. When I first stepped up with my feet uphill on this, it was a little bit more wobbly. This feels a little bit more contented. All right, let's get off of that. And if you need to shake it out, take a few steps just to kind of utilize your ankles, please do. And we'll be done with that really distinct dorsiflexion. So we'll move the chair out of the way. You might keep it on call if where we're going next requires you to have a little hand balance support. So we were just in that dorsiflexion. And again, that's when the top of the foot comes towards the front of the shin. I want us to work on plantar flexion. I'm going to use my blanket, but just as padding. I've got these bony, buniony feet, and they don't love the hardwood floor as a pressure point. So this is just for a little padding. You could do the same. And when we come onto this, I'm going to start again with my feet at that pelvic width distance. I'm not centered over the stripe. I wonder if that'll drive anyone crazy. It might drive me crazy. And as I have this, I'm going to weight shift over onto the left. And that's just so that I can pick up this right foot. I'll go to the side. And I'm going to bend into my right knee and come onto my tiptoe, and then come on to the tops of my toes. So it's like the knuckles of my toes are on the ground. And I'm going to keep this for a moment. Note that my knee is forward of my other standing leg. My knee is forward of my hip. And if this is really intensive for you, stay a little bit closer to a tiptoe. You'll end up raising the knee a little bit. But as you can you get onto the knuckles of the toes? So I'm sort of on the toenail, toe knuckle. All right, I'm going to change this. So this knee has been forward. This is where balance might be tricky. So again, just put a hand out for something because that doesn't need to be the main event here. I'm going to move this thigh, this right thigh back so that I'm a little bit more on the top of my foot. So from here, it was like standing on like a foot fist. And for here, it's a little bit more like coming onto the top of the foot. I'm gesturing on my hand, but you know, they're kind of the same body part. And then when I get to this, my particular habit is to do everything with something of a back bend. So I'm going to try to hold my spine back And I can't say that I'm putting weight back, like I'm not leaning into that foot, but I do want to make sure that I haven't excessively tipped myself forward so that this is not load bearing at all. I'm just going to throw a glance over my shoulder to confirm that my heel is pointing what I'll call straight up or centered. We'll do a little change on that in a moment, but I want to draw a baseline for us. Oh, what is going on back there? I know what's going on back there. It's springtime when I'm teaching this, and it's like, shedding the winter boot and the wool socks. All right, let's come off of that side. Again, you can start just with your pelvic width distance, take a breath or two. First iteration is to bring the knee forward and to come maybe on toenails, toe knuckles. Give that a couple of breaths. And just get a sense like how and where, who, what, when, why. And when you have this, I wonder if you'll experience what I do, which is that I'm on my toes, but they feel like they're like crossed over each other and bundled. So I'm going to just lighten off for a second, try to flare my toes apart, hard to do, and then come back on top of them. All right, so this is version 1, knee is forward, the standing leg. Can I then get my knee in line with or behind the standing leg and come so that I'm more on the top of my foot, like the flat of my foot where your shoelaces would be, and not so much on a knuckle or the nails, though I can still feel their contact to the floor. You might be like me, like as soon as that leg goes behind you, you begin to put your chest forward. So can you drop your ribs down? Stand towards your neutral. Your arms could be doing whatever is interesting. I tend to gesticulate a lot, but you could hold your hips, have them alongside. You could be very yogic and do Anjali Mudra. And again, I'm going to confirm, I think it to be true, yet not so bad. My heel is pointing centered. It's not tipping out or in. We'll do that in one moment, but I want to give us a starting point. How's it going? All right, let's come off of this. We're going to go back to the right side. So it starts with like toenail, toe knuckle. And then as you move that foot back, you end up more on the top of the foot. And then from here, I'm going to roll my foot so that the heel knocks out to the side. Now, if you're one of these folks, and our numbers are legion, that you have laxity around your outer ankle because you've rolled and twisted your ankle a whole bunch of times, and this feels like not smart to you, then skip it and go to the inside. If that doesn't describe you, or you've done those things to your ankles before, but they've been a long time healed and this feels good, then you're welcome to it. I don't think a brief stretch is going to set you up for that much more of a likelihood of rolling your ankle, but I know that some people kind of have that as one of their things that they're very squeamish about, and I don't mean to make you face every one of your fears while you're stretching your foot. All right, so I've been pushing out to the outside towards the camera for a second. Now I'm going to tip a little bit more towards the inside, and I roll my whole leg with this, right? So I could almost isolate this down to my ankle joint, but it's such a funny position. I'm not going to enforce that to happen. So I'm going to let that heel tip to the midline over towards that wall that's behind me, and my leg will turn out slightly. I'll face the rest of my body forward and just kind of sense that as a new sensation for the ankle. Right, back to center, and then I'll slip that foot out. We'll do the other side. I know that for some folks coming into this long duration of plantar flexion, starting on knuckle and nail, moving the foot back, that this puts us towards a likelihood of a foot cramp. Learn to see those coming and get out of the pose before you cramp, because a foot cramp is just, it's very annoying. Usually it's quite short-lived, but it's like, it doesn't feel good. If you do end up in a foot cramp while we're in this plantar flexion, go back to dorsiflexion, that ankle calf stretch we were doing a moment before, so that you've got, your remedy right there. Okay, so I've been pointing my heel up. Now I'm going to rock it over towards the left. If that's your squeamish part of your ankle because you've suffered a good number of injuries there, I don't think this increases the likelihood. I don't think will do you harm, but the doer of the pose has to contend with it. So I'll leave that up to you. And then we'll center the heel, and then I'm going to tip my heel in. And again, I don't have much rotation there aside from what I can get out of my hip. So my knee will even turn out slightly. And I'm resting more on like that bunion, big toe edge, that sort of inner line of the foot. It's good stuff in there. All right, and then we'll roll back to center, slide the foot out from there, and just give that a little shake out. And again, maybe walk a few steps, see how those ankles contend with your weight. And I hope that one feels good. I have to admit the calf stretch that we started with, that dorsiflexion with one foot parked up a blanket, is one I go to frequently, especially when a season change is coming. Like from winter to spring, I'm more active. From spring to summer, I do even more stuff. So I try to go into those little transitional phases when it's like, I'll be walking more, or now I'm in the garden so much more. And I do give some extra TLC to the ankles and calves. It seems to help. All right, thank you very much. I hope that felt good.